Let me know if you guys are having problems on your end, but the stream should be back. Sorry about that. I don't know. OBS decided to crash. Technology. No idea why I did that. Okay, I think we might be back for the most part. I must have taken it out. That's bizarre. I don't remember deleting it. Maybe I accidentally hit U. I don't remember. Yeah, okay. Now it's fine. Yeah, I think I must have accidentally removed that change. Okay. So let's put these back in. And of course, this is the problem of using two tools. Okay, that's what I would expect. So we've got our character literals here. So this is just an A. This is an A escape, which is, what is it? I don't even remember. Something. And we've got the bell line, new line, an escaped backslash. This is a ASCII byte in hex. This is a code point. This is a 16-bit Unicode code point. This is a 32-bit Unicode code point. And then this is a octal ASCII value. And so the lexer is roughly enforcing that structural expectation. So that's good. That's what we want. Yeah, so the diff for that is we just added the code for the rune literal tokenizer. It's a little different from the others, but not too much, right? We skip past the prefix, we get our start position. We read the first character after the single quote. If it's a backslash, we have to handle that. Especially if it's not, then it's just that single character. Then we're expecting a closing quote. We move past the closing quote, and we create our token. And then in our tests, we just added more cases, right? So single character, escaped characters, escaped Unicode, and all that. That looks good. And we added in, that's weird. Yeah, somehow I screwed up my windows here. Yeah, so we added the rune literal token struct in this case. And then this one, I made changes to the project file. Okay, so that's done. So identifiers are, I think, going to be fairly easy. So identifiers are basically anything that's not a keyword, not an operator. And what we want to do here, a little bit different, is, oops, we want to read the current character here. And then obviously if it's bad, we'll bail. And then an identifier can start with underscore or an alpha character. So if the rune is an underscore or not underscore, and it's not alpha, then hey, it's a coder's life. Okay, so if our start condition is invalid, then we're going to bail. Otherwise, we're going to just loop until so if a rune is digit, or if it's not a digit, or and it's not alpha, and it's not underscore, then we break. Okay, so we come into the identifier case, we check the character that we're starting on. If it's bad, we bail. Otherwise, if it's not an underscore or a letter, then that's a syntactical error. If it is, we move past that character. And in this case, we grab our start position right away. And oh my gosh, my back is killing me today for some reason. So then we fall into this loop, and we read the current character at the current position. If it's not a digit, it's not a letter, or it's not an underscore, in other words, we've hit a character that is not part of our identifier, we stop. Otherwise, we move to the next character. And then we come down here. We're going to create our token. And this is going to be a an identifier. And that's it. I think that's all it takes. So Clown of Fire says, what do you personally think is the hardest part of the Basecode project? It's an interesting question. Make sure I didn't break anything. It's okay. All right, so let's go to our test case here. And let's create a new test case. So let's write some real code here. Let's just do that. That's pretty good. So this should work. Foo should be an identifier. We should get a operator, another identifier, an operator, literal, punctuation, identifier, operator, literal, punctuation, identifier, punctuation, literal string, punctuation. That's what we should get. So what do I think the most complicated part of the project has been? Well, so there's different levels to that question, right? What's the most complicated from a design perspective? What's the most complicated from, maybe a specific piece of functionality? Well, it didn't fail. Oh, no, it did fail. Identifiers must start with or a letter. All right. Let's see what it's actually starting on. Here's I think the right answer for me anyway. The right answer is, what is Basecode? Right? Like, it's the design of the language itself is, to me, the hardest part. Because it's not... Basecode hopefully is doing some things that other languages don't do. And when you're doing something new, it's not always so clear what you need or where you should go, what that should be. So like if you were just making a knockoff language, right, or you're just kind of making something that's already sort of been done, you have a lot of guidance. And it's not like, again, within the compiler space, writing parsers and translators and all that stuff, that part's not really, there's work there, but it's mostly mechanical, right? Just stuff you have to do. But yeah, I would definitely say that it's the actual language design itself. And to some extent, that's why, like when I took my break from it and I came back and I'm like, all right, this is really, after reanalyzing it, like I was having a lot of fun playing around in code generation land, but like that's mostly a solved problem. I mean, that's mostly a known. Like I wasn't blazing any trails there. I was just kind of having fun doing garbage, right? To doing stuff. But it occurred to me that like that was keeping me from interacting with my language, right? Actually getting the language up and running to a usable point where I could really start saying, no, this idea sucks. I would prefer to do it that way, or, oh, I really think I should do this or do that. And there's also like, so I'll come back to this in a second, but there's other subtle things, right, that I want to do with Basecode that's different than what others have done. But it's also more complicated because I want to do it the way I want to do it. It's not as obvious what that ends up being. So, but I found colon. Ah, right. I think I know what's going on. Because it's the same thing, right? I'm going to move past the last one. Foo, U8 bar foo. Okay, good. I mean, that one looks good. Foo, U8 bar foo. But then it's getting hung up here. Is that because my dictionary's messed up? No.
Fighters. Truth, justice, and the American way.
So, I mean, all that's right. Hey, Pixelogic Dev. Right, so these all... This matched, this matched. What? Why is it doing that? Oh, I think I know. My logging is kind of confusing. Yeah, sorry, I got sidetracked. I was still kind of rambling about that. So here's one example, okay? Like, and what I'm about to say is in no way, like, I am not criticizing or picking on these other languages. I'm just pointing out a difference in approach. And that is, like, as an example, if we look at a language like Odin, in Odin, Ginger Bill did a great job. Again, this is not criticizing Odin or him, but he has a lot of things that are kind of like hard-coded in the compiler. Things that I consider to be, like, if you had a real meta-programming system, these things should be easy to build in the language itself in modules. So as an example, he has like a 128-bit integer type that is built into the compiler. He has bit sets, bit flag types that are built in. He has maps that are built in, and I kind of view that stuff again as you should be able to build those sorts of abstractions very cleanly on top of whatever the foundation is that you have. Or stated a different way, I would like to do it that way, right? I would like to make the core language, the core platform, powerful, like a Forth or a Lisp, but fundamentally powerful, right? Like, it's enough power that you can bootstrap into all these other more complex things. So string types, right? Like, again, I'm using Odin as an example because the code's available, but string types are, several string types are actually built into the compiler, and it assumes those things. So I look at that stuff and I say, okay, well, I want to build that as user modules that you can just pull in, right? And then it works. It's very seamless, and syntactically is seamless. So that's an example. I think that's a challenge, right? So when you say, what do I think the hardest part is, that's, to me, the harder part. And maybe it turns out that most of it isn't really that difficult, but right now I view it as some of the more challenging aspects of what I'm trying to do. And any time that you do meta stuff like that, where A begets B and B begets more A and A, it's kind of confusing to think about because the start and the end are not always clear. Even though oftentimes you can find logical begins and ends in those sorts of things, it's not clear always at first blush where those are at and where the meta ends, right? And you need to have some kind of bootstrap, shim, prime mover, whatever you want to call it, that's outside of the meta universe that makes these things work. So I say all that as to, yet again, the reason why I'm kind of rebooting the bootstrap is because I want to really tackle those problems. And in order to tackle those problems, the language has to work. So getting the core language to work then gets me closer to those kinds of problems, which I think are the more interesting problems. And yeah, anyway. Okay, so I'm just kind of trying to figure out what's going on here because we are identifying, we are getting identifiers and it's finding most of them. So our first character is an F, FO, FOO. It's not in the dictionary. We're going to look for an identifier. We found it. U8, not in the dictionary. We looked it up as an identifier. Colon is, so we get that. That's a match. Right. Interesting. But we didn't get... We didn't get this. that's a problem. That should be in the dictionary. And why are we not seeing it? Could have swore I put that in the dictionary. Yeah, here it is. I'm noticing a pattern here. It's like single character matches in the dictionary don't seem to be working. I think I know. Yeah. I know what's going on. I know what's going on. Okay, so these are interesting. So we're having a problem with asterisk and with colon. And that's because these two, we would have problems with the ampersand and the pipe too, or the equal. So that my inner loop there, my inner matching loop is not smart enough at the moment. So like the reason this is failing is because there are additional tokens in the dictionary that are the same character repeated. And so what's happening is we're asking the dictionary for colon. It's finding everything that begins with a colon. But because there are more than one match, it's continuing to look at the next character, and that is resulting in, well, I thought. Oh, but then there's colon and, nah, okay. The way I did this in the old one was the multi-map was ordered. So I could put the more specific tokens in front of the least specific tokens. In this case, that's not really viable. All right, let me think about this. Yeah, what's happening is we're asking for colon, and it's coming back with several No, there is look ahead, but it's okay. So yeah, we've got attempting to match F. What matches F? False family for fall through. So the way the logic is written, that's not specific enough. There are too many choices. So the tokenizer has to narrow down the choices. So what it does is it looks ahead to the next character. So now we have FO. So now it tries to match FO. And the map comes back with for and foo. Or I'm sorry, comes back with for, which doesn't match, right? Because the next character is O. So that doesn't match anything in the dictionary. So then we go to our special tokenizer, which means it's an identifier, and we capture foo. Then we try to match colon. So what that comes back with is the bind operator, the type operator, and the assignment operator, which is what I was assuming was happening. Then, as you can see, this is exactly what it's doing. It's actually looking ahead and it's seeing space. So then it's trying to match colon space. But here's an interesting side effect of this, which the logic is not handling right now. In the case of this, colon, bind, assign, in this case, we actually do have a valid match. The very first, or not the first, but whatever order this comes out in, right? This one doesn't match because the length of the value from the dictionary is too long, but this one does match. However, what we have now is a situation where this loop has to carry over a valid match to the next round because we still have to disambiguate. So I'm just trying to think of how to do that. I mean, there is a fairly simple, I guess. So what we're doing here is we're going to flag a match and the match's array as a match if the value of the key we get from the dictionary is the same length as the view that we're currently trying to prefix match against. So now temporarily I just changed the condition to use that variable now that we're pre-computing it. So I don't expect that to change anything. I'm just going to verify. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I started using Vim on Monday because Sea Lion kind of pissed me off a little bit. All right, yeah. Okay. All right, so that, yeah. Okay, good. This is where we're bombing. But there's another issue here that before I go too more deeply, I want to fix, because if I put that next to the identifier, okay, good. That fixes that problem. Okay, so now we're just back to fixing this. So what we want to do is up. Down here. That's kind of goofy. Match. I'll go with it for now. Okay, so what we're going to do is I hoisted the vector of matches outside the loop. And so that means that that vector is going to have state in it from iteration to iteration of our internal matching loop, which it didn't previously. And then what we're doing is when we put the match structures into that array, we're setting that field. So let's say candidate. I'll make it candidate. Okay, this will be candidate. Okay, so we're putting that into that list every time through, and the candidate field is true if the key during this iteration matches the length of the prefix we're trying to match. And so then we're going to do our comparison, right? So it's still going to try to disambiguate, get it down to one match, or if there are no matches, then we go do the identifier thing. If we get down here to the bottom of the loop, where we're going to go around again and try to disambiguate more, what we're going to do now is we're going to take everything out of the list that wasn't a potential candidate. So what should happen here in the case of colon, 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 colon equal is the first time through that loop, colon, colon is not a candidate. Colon is a candidate. And colon equal isn't a candidate. We're going to then take out colon, colon, and colon equal. We're going to loop around again. We're going to try a more specific match, right? Nothing new is going to be added because in this case, colon space doesn't match anything new. So that's going to leave us with one match. In this case, which is colon. So let's see if but there's an issue with what I did here. Oh, right. I called it candidate. Okay, so let's see if, ooh, no, that's bad. Oh, right, because, yeah, shit. let's do this. Let's run it in the debugger. Well, that might be problem number one. Wasn't scrubbing, doesn't appear to be scrubbing. So matches has 16 things in here. Right. So this is like this is hex. So we did a $sign. So we, as a first round, we got all the potential hex prefixes because we just started at the $. But none of them match yet. So this should, why is it 8? It's still in here. I love every time I search on the C++ standard library and DuckDuckGo gives me a bunch of STD, sexually transmitted disease stuff at the very top of search every time. It's hilarious. Oh, right. That was the boo-boo I made. I think I do that every damn time. Yeah. That was the mistake I made. Right, so the binary case. Why is that one not working? Because, right, okay, yeah. So this is the issue that I was thinking previously that I messed up or hadn't addressed. right? So so I think maybe the right place for this is just before here. And this is a little bit more complicated than just okay, so here's the problem. I want to keep track of potential exact matches until I get the most specific exact match. That's not what I wanted to do. So, as an example, what's happening with binary is percent is the mod, %1 or %0 is the start of a binary number. So what's happening is the first round through, we are getting an exact match on the percent, but in this case, that doesn't end up being the winning match. So that should be discarded. So the first time through the loop, we're going to get 3 candidates, but only one of them is an exact match. So the first time through the loop, our loop should be left with the match that is for the mod operator. And then when we come back around, right, we've now looked ahead a character, and it turns out it's 1. And that's actually going to match a more specific thing. So now our length is 2, and we found %1, its length is 2. So now we have 2 matches in the dictionary. Or I'm sorry, in the list, rather. So actually, I think what we have to do is another loop here. Where, so I can actually just borrow. So if match is a candidate and match key length is less than length, then we erase it, right? So what this is going to do is every subsequent round, the matches that we've carried over that are no longer specific enough get dropped. But does that work? Only if new candidates this round were added, then we want to truncate, trim out older candidates. If nothing new, so if we go through the first round, we hold over a potential match. We go through the second round, we disambiguate, no new matches are added, then whatever's in the matches vector, that's our match. But if we go through the first round, we get a candidate, and then we go through the second round, we disambiguate, we get a better candidate. Now we want to clean out the old one. So in that case, second round, we would have, the start size here would have been 1, and then we would have added 1, we would have added 1. So now matches is something new has been added to the matches list. So now we want to clean out anything that no longer is valid. And I guess a way that you could optimize this, which I'll come back to, right, is we know at this point whatever is in the vector is from the previous round. And if it's going to be invalidated, it we can just look at what those indexes are ahead of time. So, I mean, we could make this a little simpler, but I think that's correct. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we start on F. Foo. Okay. We match the identifier. We hit the colon. We get 3 possibilities: colon, 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 colon equal. Eventually, we match on just the colon. We get an identifier. Again, we start on a colon. We have 3 possibilities. We get to colon equal. We get an exact match. We hit a 3. That's a prefix for a number parser. So we go to custom tokenizer. We hit a semicolon. That is a punctuation. We parse bar as an identifier. We see colon. Again, we get 3 possibilities. We match on colon equal. We get foo again. We get star. So there are 1, 2, 3 possibilities with star. We actually end up matching on just the multiply operator. And then we get to 1, and that's a custom tokenizer. Then we bomb because it's saying it can't narrow that integer value. So let's look at that. It's looking much better. Actually, let's look at our lexer test here. Okay, so that's going to be decimal. Yeah, so it's just going to be make number token. So let's just look at what let's look at both. I'm guessing we're off somewhere by a character. Well, maybe. 16. That looks okay. Let's put something around it. Make sure that there isn't like a space or something in there. Although stir to LL should ignore the space, I think. Not that the space should be there, mind you. There is no space. Okay. Interesting. I think I know what it is. That's my hunch. Because next power 2 is dumb, right? Like if you're on 16 and you say give me the next power 2, it's going to give you 32, right? Like it isn't, if I'm on the power of 2, give you that, otherwise go to the next one. It's not like an align to power of 2. So I think that may have been the issue. No? Something else. So let's log out info. Info. Gotta have the info. Max bit position for size and bytes. Oh. Ha. Right. Okay, that's easy to fix. Smallest size is is 8. That. Helps if I spell it right. There we go. Right. That's good. Now, everybody was throwing all these, do this, do that, test this, test that. All right, fine, let's test those. So, so one of the cases was keywords don't match inside of identifiers. So Phil's example was continue if bool equal false. And then we also had so 1, 2, 3 my var, that should be an error actually, so we'll do that separately here. There you go. It is seeing it as a continue, or as a keyword. Right, because for keywords, I forgot one thing. I had made a note about this early on, and I forgot about it. So, in the case of keywords, in the old lexer, I actually kind of had this rule repeated over and over again in the individual tokenizers. It's like, as an example, if what I would do is in the last one, I would say, you know, it can't be an alpha character, an alphanumeric character next. It has to be like a punctuation. And that's true with a lot of these. So if it's a keyword, what we're going to have to do
Care about what happened really. He's dead. I showed him my thing. Get him killed. Do you know what this means? Demolition duo. Sounds like a wet dream to me. Well, I want to show you what I made. This is a like a dead man's head. I have to hold it in there. Keep the pain under control. Breaking news flash just in. There is a psycho death bot on the loose. What are we gonna do?
Okay, so we come in here, we have a match. If it's a keyword, then what we're going to do is we're going to extend the slice by one character, and, or actually, let's do it like this. And we're going to look at that very next character. If the next character is an alpha character or it's a digit character, and actually with keywords,
Wanna know what the neatest thing is?
really, like, keywords don't have numbers in them.
That's what keys are. What's that mean?
He's on fear.
The more afraid you are, the sharper its trace.
So I'm just going to check for alpha, I think, because I don't think we need to worry about numbers. So if the next character is an alpha character, then it's not a match, and we're going to go to the next round. still see. Oh, because what? Oh, yeah. It's still seeing it as a keyword though, because why? And it's getting the colon. Is colon considered an alpha? I think it is. So is alpha returns false for colon, so that it should be, it should go up to that point. Okay, so we start with the continue part of continue if. It does get to a point where it does fall into our case here. It's not a keyword, so keep going. Oh, I think I see. So actually, yeah, that would be fine. Snake AZ asks about what sounds like either a machine monitor or an assembler. You have to give me more information. I need to know what processor it is. It's a Coder's Life asked me, on a personal note, if it's not a problem to ask, how do you manage time between family, work, and side projects? I find it very difficult. Either I'm a bad time manager or over anxious on doing many things. That's a big question to answer, so I will answer it, but I'll try not to do it while I'm doing two things at once. Okay, this looks better. So we go up to continue. The next character is an I. It's not a keyword. We keep going. The next character is right. So what we have to do here, interestingly enough, so I think the issue now is just oops. There we go. Okay. So now continue if is marked as an identifier, even though it actually comes about through concatenation of keywords. That's accepted. We get the colon, we get the bool, we get the assignment, we get false, we get the punctuation, we get the end. So that was one. Another was, I think, just a invalid identifier. I think it was something like 123 myvar. Ah, yeah, this is the same thing. So it's actually not like numbers are the same issue. It's actually kind of the same exact. So I actually wonder in this case, this is invalid, sort of. Like from the lexer's perspective, this is a bit ambiguous. Yeah, I'll be putting it on YouTube. So from the lexer's perspective, technically, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. This is coming out as a number, not as part of an identifier. So this is parsing a number, then an identifier, then an operator, identifier, operator, number, and punctuation. This actually kind of feels to me like this is a grammatical error, right? Like it's nonsensical to have a number like this in front of an identifier. So I'm wondering if that condition is just gets punted to the parser, and then the parser is going to see a number and then an identifier, and that's not valid grammar, so that's going to fail. This is something that the lexer has to handle because this is a valid identifier. And then I'm actually thinking that, like, this doesn't really apply. Right, because for custom tokenizers, they get to do whatever they want. So I mean, one rule we could apply, I guess, in that vein is that we could say that numbers, like the number parser could assert that an alpha does not come after it, immediately after it. And that would be an error. That would be unexpected. So again, it's kind of the same thing. If punctuation or white space come after the number, then it's okay. And then the code I had put here to handle the keyword case, so that really is, okay, we found a match in the dictionary. If it happens to be a keyword, we have to handle it in a special way. So actually, let's try that. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a short break. When I come back, I'm going to answer It's a Coder's Life question, and then I'll get back to this. And then I think, like I say, what we'll do with the number parser is we'll just afterward we'll just verify. It's going to have to be different. So for like decimal and octal and binary, it would be any alpha character. Well, actually, I think it's the same for all of them. Yeah, so we'll adjust the number tokenizer to check immediately after. If it's a character that it's not expecting, then the number's invalid, right? The parsing ends. And then that will handle this case at the tokenization level. So 123 myvar is not valid. Okay, I'm going to take a short break. I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so It's a Coder's Life asked a very interesting question. I'll repeat the question. How do I manage time between family, work, and side projects? So, first, I'm just going to go through some maybe obvious things that help. They are a percentage of the whole. They're not the whole, right? So first, if you are not on a consistent daily schedule, you should get there. That took me a very long time in my life for a variety of reasons. I would say I'm pretty good with that now. I go to bed 6 o'clock roughly every night. I wake up at 2 a.m. every morning, give or take. Sometimes, if I'm not feeling well, I don't push it. So, again, everything is in context and as appropriate, but that's my schedule. So that's number one. And everybody's schedule is different. There's nothing magical about getting up early. If you really truly are a night owl and you work best that way, then you should probably set your schedule up around that. Your schedule has to, like everything, you have to prioritize things. So what is the most important? And this is a tricky one, right? And I don't know, my answer might make everybody hate me. But you have to prioritize things in terms of what's most important to you. Not everything can be number one. And for me, if I go too many days without accomplishing something that I truly want to accomplish, I get depressed. I get irritable. I get antsy. I'm very unhappy. So for me, I knew that while I want to spend quality time with my family and do all these other things, if I'm pissed off most of the time or unhappy most of the time, it's going to be difficult for me to do those other things. So I prioritize doing my work, doing my thing, and that could be different for everybody. It doesn't have to be the same. Very highly, because that gives me a stable foundation to build upon. If I get stuff done every day, I may have other problems, other things going on, but at least I know, hey, I'm making progress on this thing that's important to me. So genericizing that or abstracting that up a level, you have goals, whatever those are. And if those goals are truly important to you, you prioritize them. And if you make some progress on those goals, then that's a good, foundation. But I know a lot of people who they want to work on side projects, or they want to work on whatever they want to work on, but family commitments and all these other things seem to swamp out whatever time that they might have to do that. That is, so again, I've been married for 25 years. It took my wife and I some time to get to a point where, like, she understood me, and I could explain things to her. It's different for everybody, but you have to have an honest conversation with your partner, right, about what's important to you. So if you have things that you want to get done, if you have things you want to do, and they're truly important, then you have to be able to carve time out, right? And you have to be able to, by definition, if you're prioritizing things, you have to be able to say no to a lot of stuff. And that can be difficult. But you just have to work through that and come to some compromise where possible. And then again, going back to the schedule thing, it's consistency, right? It's you try to do the same things every day during the same times for the same time period. That not only makes it easy on you, it makes it easy on the others in your life. They know when you're busy. They know when they can interrupt you possibly, or when, your significant other could come in and talk to you about the cake at some part, whatever, right? Whatever is not something that is going to cause you to cash dump and ruin your day. Now, obviously, emergencies happen, things happen, right? But again, the more consistent you are, the easier it is for you to set up boundaries for the rest of the world. Some more commonly given, probably at this point, cliched advice, but I'll give it anyway. Silence your phone. I don't mean put it on vibrate. I don't mean turn the volume down so you can still kind of sort of hear it. I mean silence it. No sound, no alerts. I disable alerts from everything. Ignore it. Ignore email. Look, to me, the SLA, even if there is one on email, is probably starts at about 48 hours. Your level of responsiveness to things that you get to dictate that stuff, right? If you want to answer emails within 24 hours, great. But again, email is an asynchronous communication. I try to set expectations that I don't answer things that quickly. Interestingly enough, that's why I absolutely hate most messaging systems. I seriously dislike Slack, or any of its ilk. Discord is fine because that's kind of that's community, personal communication, whatever, right? But for work and things like that, I hate those tools because they create this expectation that you're there and that you're instantly going to answer. So again, with that sort of stuff, if you're already in it, if you're already working with a company and you've already kind of sort of set expectations that you're going to be 24/7 instantly available through whatever messaging systems they use, you're going to have to work harder to dig yourself out of those things. But the thing that you have to remember is going forward, when you come to new boundary points where somebody says, oh, we use Slack, or oh, we use whatever, we use Teams, we use Skype for Business, whatever, you have to seriously think about how you're going to explain to people and you have to stick to your guns. Like, I don't use those tools, or I prefer email, right? And you don't even have to be confrontational about it. You don't even, again, like just sort of set the boundaries of what you're willing to do. And, but at the same time, you gotta, with a lot of this stuff, right? We kind of live in this take it or leave it world when it comes to work. Employers are, this is the way it is sort of deal most of the time. Now, again, I think most people you can negotiate with them if you do it well, if you do it properly. But at some point, if you care about doing things in your life, if you, again, it comes back to your goals, not your company's goals, not your spouse's goals, not your parents' goals, not your friends' goals, your goals, right? If they are important to you, then by definition, they must take precedence to everything else. And I realize what I'm saying is scary, right? It's kind of heresy, right, in our world today, which is weird, but it's true. It is. It's the notion that you don't just give your entire life to your employer and you're not just on 24/7 and then, little Johnny has 25 games during the day and little Susie has 2 performances tonight and you're just gonna, do it all, right? Well, look, I mean, step number 1 is realizing you can't do it all. So then, and again, isn't it funny? Like, the thing that screws software projects repeatedly is scope, right? You get a new job, you go in, and they tell you, this is what we want to build, and we have to have it done in 30 days, right? And it takes you about 250 milliseconds to realize there's no way ever in this universe that what they just asked you to do in 30 days is ever going to happen, right? That's true in every aspect of life, right? Is scoping. Now I'm going to change track just a little bit. I'm going to talk about some meta around this, and it's somewhat philosophical, I guess, but here's the evil or dark side of goals, of doing things, right? You are going to be tempted to compare your efforts with others. And yet again, there's plenty of cliches here to go around. You're only competing against yourself, only compare against yourself. It doesn't matter what other people are doing. And rationally, intellectually, most people can accept that, right? Can compartmentalize and say, yes, I understand that. But the reality is, we're human and our brains are stupid on so many levels, and there are just things that are built in. You just respond. Louis Rossman actually had a really good video about this, I think a couple weeks back, right? And he hit the nail on the head, right? And for him it was, he sees these other business owners and they get money, they get investor money, they get loans, they get really fancy, retail spaces, and he's stuck in his shitty retail space with rats, and he knows that the property management company's trying to kick him out. But so what it comes down to is that He's comparing himself to these others, and it's unfair. It appears unfair, and unfairness is part of it, right? But it's also envy or jealousy, or you know, you lose confidence in yourself. Like, oh, I see that this other person is doing kind of something similar to me, and my gosh, it looks like they're so much further along than I am. I suck. I'm going to quit. It doesn't matter. The only thing I can say here is this is I think it's common to everybody. Okay. And you have to be aware of it. You have to, this is, I'm not big on meditation or any of that stuff, but I am sort of convinced that developing the ability to observe yourself objectively, observe yourself from outside of your own head, is an interesting skill to acquire. It takes lots of practice. It is not a natural activity by any stretch of the imagination. And I am nowhere near a perfect practitioner. I don't think anybody is, right? But being able to detect that you are feeling that way, accept that you're feeling that way, and then, observe in a rational, objective way, why what you're feeling is not, it's not cause for crisis, right? And this is the problem, right, with human biology, in my opinion, is that if your boss makes some passive-aggressive comment about your tie, that can be interpreted by your brain as the same as a poisonous snake is about to bite you, right? One is a real physical, life-threatening condition. The other is it's meaningless. I mean, really, in the grand scheme of things, it's meaningless. But the emotional interactions, whether they're direct or indirect, right? And when we're talking about like observing, other people's apparent success or apparent progress, those are indirect emotions. Those are emotions that you kind of gin up within yourself as you are making these observations about other people. Again, to Louis Rossman's point in his video, he basically says, look, I can't stop feeling the way I feel. And I think that's a very true and important point. You're going to feel this way. The trick is to be able to catch yourself when you do, not suppress the emotion, not try to quash it, try to understand it, and try to be fair to your, to yourself, right? Because everybody's circumstances are different. Everybody has different starting points. Everybody has different paths through life. Now, I'm going to go one level deeper on this, and I'm going to add a predicate, if you will, a filter that's very important. And this is, it's what I call the famous rich person filter, okay? And it goes like this. There are people in our societies that are either incredibly famous extremely wealthy or both. And typically it's both. Typically they have both. Because our societies intermingle those two things very strongly. Ignore them, right? You cannot compare yourself in any way to those people. Those people, just pretend they're unicorns or wizards or whatever, because here's the thing you have to understand about that group of people. They got lucky. I know nobody likes it when I say that. I know we've had debates on stream about this before, but there are people on our planet that through dint of a combination of events that were not purposeful, right? They just were at the right place at the right time and did the right things that resulted in them becoming phenomenally famous or phenomenally wealthy. And you can't, you just can't reproduce that stuff. You can't. So even though those people can inspire you, you have to be very careful, right? That you only get inspired and not downtrodden, because the difference between where you are and where they are is significant. And significant not in sense of skill sets, right? Significance in terms of resources. Look, if it's really, really simple. If you have fuck you money, life is about, I would say, 4 orders of magnitude easier. Right? Now, it's not to say you won't have problems, because as the saying goes, wherever you go, there you are. But if you don't have to worry about where the food comes from, where the, bills, how the bills are being paid, any of that stuff, right? That is a huge bandwidth hog. Those things are massive bandwidth hogs for people. So these people who are rich and famous, on some level, they have more bandwidth, right? It's just fundamentally unfair, right? Because they do not have to do the things that most people have to do to stay in a house and to eat food and to buy things, right? So be very careful comparing your progress with people who are disproportionately advantaged. Now, I want to make it clear, I am in no way criticizing these people who are disproportionately advantaged. Some of them worked very hard to get it. Some of them got lucky. Some of them inherited it. It doesn't really matter. How they got it is not really all that relevant. That they have it and that it significantly changes their interaction with the world on a day-to-day basis is really all you need to understand. And that it's just, you cannot compare yourself. It's like this, right? According to Twitch, I have 1,753 followers. Okay. I think that's really cool. Like, I never expected to have that many people watching me write code or talk about crap. I never imagined that. So, I mean, I figured if I had a couple hundred people, like, I'd be doing really good. Now, I could really depress myself, right? Like, I could, let's just see, So let's see here. How many followers does Mr. Casey have here? So Casey has 30,000 followers. Mr. Blow has 18,000. Okay. Now, here's the funny part. I could get really depressed about that. Be like, wow, holy shit. Like, they're doing so much better than I am. But it's all relative, right? They have a higher public profile than I do. So that's easy to understand. But, like, occasionally I'll watch Boogie, who's, Boogie has almost 500,000. And the guy just, like, kind of self-deprecates for hours on stream. And then the irony is that I could, now I gotta be very careful here. Here, this, I think, yeah, like I could pick some female streamer who's very attractive, and they have lots and lots of followers because they're very attractive. So the key is that you can't, it's all relative, right? If John Carmack were to decide to start streaming, he would have hundreds of thousands of followers, right? He would eclipse Casey and John. It's just all a matter of where you happen to be at. But everybody's at a different position. And so I bring up all these things because these are the things that demotivate people. These are the things that cause you to slow down and not continue because you feel like there's no point. You feel like what I'm doing is so insignificant compared to other people or whatever, but that's not really why you're doing it. I mean, it's yet another cliche, right? But in Star Trek, in the future, the economy is not based on money. It's based on improving yourself and humanity, right? Yourself, then humanity. Well, each person is going to do that in a different way. There is no absolute improvement. The key is to figure out what you can do comfortably, and that changes, right? What you want to do is today may be different in 6 months, 12 months, and a year. That's okay, right? Anyway, and work, the key with work is that it's work, right? And again, this is very difficult. I mean, I've been working long enough that I do feel like things have changed very significantly from the 80s until, to today. Like, I remember working in the 80s and the 90s, and this sort of, almost cult-like behavior that companies have today did not exist. I mean, if it did, it was in very limited. It was very limited. And I certainly didn't run into it. Nowadays, things are, and I think there's a variety of reasons for why this is the case, but yeah, things are kind of fucked up. So when it comes to work, you have to start drawing the lines. Years ago when I was still working on games, a very wise man told me, he's like, look, you've got to set your own parameters, right? You've got to say, I'm willing to work this much, and I'm willing to work between these hours or whatever, and you show up and you do the best you can do, and then you walk away. right? And whatever happens after that happens after that. It's not, you know, especially if you were an employee, right? It's not your responsibility, right? Whether the company sinks or swims, whether it makes a million more or a million less, whatever's going on, none of that is your concern. Your concern, again, assuming you're a software engineer, is to come in and do your thing and go on your merry way, right? So that's what you're being paid for, right? And again, so it's all scoping, it's all boundaries, it's all context. And it takes effort, unfortunately, right? Like if you don't aggressively apply these things daily all the time, then things will tend toward entropy, where that entropy is probably negative for you in the long term. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. You know, I didn't get rid of it. I put it in so Sea Lion pissed me off over the weekend. I was working on a different project with Sea Lion, and it kept, like, the editor just does dumb shit, right? Like, here's a perfect example. So let's go into Sea Lion rant. Okay, so I'm in the CPP file, right? I want to go to the header. Okay, well, they have a shortcut for that. Now, that time, it went right to the header. But every now and again, if I do that, it will do an entire indexing scan of all the friggin' files in the project to determine that it needs to take the CPP part off, put an H on the end, a .h, and open that file. Honestly, there are certain things in this tool, like, I do not understand what they're thinking. Like, opening the header file or the unit file for a header should be no more complex than swapping the extension and opening that file. And if that file doesn't exist, then you give the user an error, right? Like, to me, there are certain obvious, simple things that this tool should do, and they don't do it that way. They do really complex shit all the time. The other thing, and again, obviously, like every time I try to demo it, I can't demo it. And right now, this code base is small enough that it doesn't seem to be an issue. I was working in a much larger code base on Saturday, and it was definitely a problem. And but like just simple things to me, the UI thread should never ever stall. Period. Like it just shouldn't. Like, I would rather, like, if you're working in Sea Lion and they're trying to do something in the background, like give you an IntelliSense, or they're trying to give you, like, one of their little insight icons or whatever they're trying to do, like, what this thing should be doing is putting things on a queue where there's other threads that are doing that work. And if it never comes back, then those things just don't show up in the UI. Like, the UI, the editing experience should not stall because it's trying to do something for you. And I feel like, so when I first started using Sea Lion several years ago, they had a bunch of problems, right? So this was like early 2017, late 2016. I remember using it and being pretty impressed, but like their syntax highlighter was seriously broken. Like it could not parse most of C++. It could parse C okay, but it couldn't handle C++ very well. It couldn't handle 14 or 17 extensions. It could do 11 fairly well, but it was faster, right? So back then, their parser, was horrible and it was inaccurate, but like a lot of these hiccups didn't happen during the editing experience. Like I could zip around and I could just ignore the fact that it was highlighting half my file as red. It was annoying, but it didn't stop the tool, because I think the overhead of that parser was very low. It was probably written in Java. It was probably internal to their tool. But at some point, I think towards the end of 2017 or early 2018, a lot of people were harping on them, use Clang D, use Clang D, use Clang D, use Clang D. And I think they finally went down that road. Unfortunately, that created, I think, a whole new set of problems. Now their syntax highlighting is super accurate and you don't run into those kinds of problems anymore. But I think they've built a lot of UI behavior to be blocking on what Clang D tells them. And so I think there's all these cases where the UI just freezes because it can't do anything until it gets new state. And it sucks, right? If I were JetBrains, I got to assume they have some money, right? If I were JetBrains, I would hire Chris Latner or his friend, whoever he recommends, right? And say, we just want to hire you as a contractor to write us a native high-performance C++ parser for our tool, right? We can't rely on these language server things because they're too freaking slow. And they're super CPU intensive and all sorts of other things. That's what they should be doing, in my opinion. Or they need to just accept that these external tools that they're talking to are slow, and that like Clang Tidy and Clang D, they're just slow. So design your tool such that your UI experience is always snappy. The editor is always snappy. If I cut and paste code, it should be see right there. It should be responsive. It should always do what the user wants it to do. And the color, the highlighting and all that, if it floods in, asynchronously, fine. That's not as big of a deal to me as the fact that the editor just freezes. And again, in large code bases, it really freezes. It takes seconds sometimes for the UI to come back. And earlier Phil asked, well, have you turned off all their inspections and stuff? Well, if you turn off all the inspections, because their whole parsing infrastructure now relies on the inspections, then 3/4 of the behavior in the UI gets shut off. And at that point, I might as well be using Vim. So it's just disappointing, because overall, I really like using this tool. I do. It's a nice tool. Vim is okay, but you have to do a lot more work to kind of set it up, keep it working. This is much nicer. And Vim has all sorts of other issues. I'm using NeoVim, but whether you're using Vim or NeoVim doesn't really matter. When you're in a terminal, right? Because 50 years of legacy, like you cannot bind all the keys on your keyboard because this is operating in an environment that doesn't know about alt keys and control keys and function keys above 12 and right, there's all these things that terminals suck at because of their legacy. And yes, I can go into iTerm and I can bind keys in iTerm and pass them through to the terminal. But then every time I want to bind some key combination that works just fine in a native application, I have to go through this ritual, and it's just kludgy, right? And then you run into the issue of, well, Mac Vim will let you bind all the, yes, you can use the graphical Vims, but the graphical Vims are Vim again. They're not NeoVim. And there are certain things in NeoVim I like better than classical Vim. And so NeoVim doesn't have as nice options in terms of GUI bindings. But then the issue you run into there is now, and this is just, short-circuiting in my mind, but for me personally, but I've used Vim my whole life in terminals. So when you go to a graphical one, then you're not in a shell anymore. So then, getting back to a shell is a weird part of the workflow, which is one of the other reasons why I really liked the JetBrains stuff, because they have a nice terminal thing built in to their tools. It works. It just works. So yeah, anyway, that's my rant about all this. I mean, I probably will go back to C-Line here, after I get over my little temper tantrum, because it is just a nicer tool, right? But, and that's not dissing Vim. I like Vim, but yeah, it's an older view of the world, I guess. I've used VS Code. Here's my issue with VS Code. VS Code is kind of reminds me of Vim in a way, in the sense that it's all these plugins from third parties. Like the editor itself doesn't do that much. I mean, and that's not, again, not trying to diminish VS Code. It's a fine editor, but the philosophy of that editor is, here, add 2,000 plugins and it will make an IDE for you. Until you start adding these plugins and they don't work, or they don't work on your system because something isn't exactly where they expect it to be. So you end up spending a lot of time then trying to get all these things to work. And unfortunately, VS Code does the same thing that C-Line does. VS Code wants to use ClangD to do all of its IntelliSense for C++, and it's slow as shit. And VS Code doesn't hang like C-Line does, but it does other weird things that I'm not super happy about. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of my whole rant on on C-Line. I probably will go back to using C-Line. I thought to myself on Sunday, I was so pissed. I'm like, okay, like, can I just get Vim set up so I could at least work reasonably well? And, obviously the answer is yes. But, and again, like with Vim, I could keep slowly chipping away at it, right? Adding more of my own functions and scripts and things to kind of get stuff to work the way that I would want it to. Yeah. So Voicomp Phil says, they don't care. It's the exact same story with their C# tools, which, while absolutely amazing feature-wise, are also incredibly slow when all code analysis features are enabled. I really hope this will change in the next couple of years now that single-thread CPU performance isn't getting much faster, and unfortunately most of this stuff is single-thread. They will simply have to rewrite it. Yeah, again, like, and maybe this is because I come from a gaming background, but I mean, it's a no-no, right? Like, you just don't do intensive stuff on the UI thread. And yes, what that means is you might have to put like a little pause icon or a little question mark or something in the UI, so that the user knows, hey, I'm doing something. I might show you something here eventually, but not yet, right? And I try to be real forgiving, because C++ is a pain in the butt, right? I mean, obviously, like C# and Java and stuff, I mean, it's not to say they're not complicated, but they are newer platforms, and so it's easier to build tooling around some of those. I mean, I use Writer for C# stuff when I do it for clients, and like, to me, Writer, while it is slow in some areas, the one thing I will say about Writer and IDEA, which is their Java IDE, like, the editors themselves don't freeze. At least I don't typically have that experience with them. Sea Lion is the one that seems to do that the most. And again, I think it's because they're thunking with Clang D a lot. The other thing that I get the impression, not knowing how it's really built under the covers, but just looking at hints in the IDE itself, it strikes me that they have like multiple layers of caching going on, and they have serious cache coherence issues. So, like, one feature that just very rarely works, of course, the first time I do it, it'll work, right? But if I create a prototype here, okay, I just want to do Alt-Enter-Go. Okay, so it almost took a second for that to even flag it. Okay, that time it did it right? But sometimes it'll create that, it'll skip the parameters. It just won't put them in there. And to me, that's because like their caches get out of whack, and then stuff doesn't work right. So it's just simple things that I wish worked better, and they don't. The official VS Code C++ extension is pretty weird sometimes. It's pretty slow when it comes to updating the syntax, highlighting, and errors, but somehow also generates gigabyte of some. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is, and I know that, like, I think John Blow recently ranted about something like this, but like this whole language server concept, in an academic sense, it's a neat idea, but in practice, we're just not there yet, right? Like, this idea, which we keep circling around in software over and over again, Microsoft had this with COM and Olay. this idea that you can create these reusable things and that everybody can just plug into these components and that there isn't a price for that, right? That everything's just going to run super fast and you won't notice it. I mean, this is kind of the problem with the web, right? Is, oh, I'm just going to use all these other things that everybody else has given me. And that's great as long as they're there and they're performant until the day they're not there and or they're not performant. And then the whole tower comes crashing down because either you didn't design defensively, right? You didn't make the assumption that all these things that I'm going to depend on are shit and that they're going to break like 99.9% of the time. And therefore you kind of, to the extent you can, isolate yourself from their failure, which obviously a lot of these tools don't take that approach. Or you just are at the mercy of these tools. And I mean, again, I don't really know anything about the Clang project, but I'm going to say that like ClangD and syntax highlighting and the language server is not a priority for them. It's not what they're focusing on. They are focusing on C++20. They're focusing on optimizing code output. They're focusing on static analysis. That's the stuff they're working on. And yes, some of that stuff you get then indirectly back through things like ClangD. But they're not really focusing on ClangD and making it this super speedy thing. It's there, it works, sort of, most of the time. So, yeah. So anyway, I wish that they would fix that stuff, but the other thing that's really interesting about Sea Lion, which I don't understand either, like their CMake stuff, it seems broken. Sometimes, like it will regenerate. Like if you ask it to regenerate, it will regenerate multiple times. I'm not entirely sure why it does that. Like here, it visited these configurations, said it was done, it built the files, and it did it again. Like it ran it again, and then of course CMake is like, well, no, I already did that. It's just bizarre. And if I run this stuff from the command line, it never does that, right? So it's not CMake. It's like the way that they're interacting with it. Yeah. There's lots of brokenness to go around. Let's put it that way. I actually have to end today here in about 10 minutes. So why don't we review what I've done? I'll commit that. Unfortunately, I have a meeting that I have to go to at 9 my time. So yeah, let's just make sure I didn't break anything. And I don't think I did. Yeah, so let's make some notes in the to-do. So we still need to do these two. So for number parsers or number tokenizers, that I used the right term, should assert that a non-alpha character follows the number. This will prevent situations like 1, 2, 3, my var, right? Yeah. So I think that was the kind of the one thing that fell out from today's activities. Okay. Right. So there was a bug in the token. This is in the narrow to type for integers. I needed to clamp to 8 bits, right? So 4 is a valid power of 2. 2 is a valid power of 2. So if you had a 2-bit number or a 4-bit number, it was actually returning 2 or 4 bits. But we actually want to round up, right, to at least 8 bits because that's the sizing that we need. So every time I use these diff windows, closing them is always a pain in the ass. And it screws up my tabs. Diff O, diff off. Okay, so let's try that. Better. Okay. Better butter. All right, so that was that one. For our tests, why does it see? Yeah, so for our tests, we added some new tests. One test specifically for identifiers, which that looks like it's working correctly now. The other for excluding, or it should err in this case, and it's not. And I made a note about that in the tool, or in the to-do list. Yeah, see now my windows are all messed up. So then in the lexer, on our matching structure, I was trying to track a reference to the lexeme structure. I changed that. I think because I broke the loop at one point and then forgot to take out the reference. So I fixed that, and we have a candidate flag now. And then I hoisted the matches array up, and so now what's happening is as we go through this list, as we're trying to match things from the dictionary, the matches from previous rounds carry through, and then there's logic now that removes out old matches that are no longer valid and keeps matches that are more specific. When before we're completely done with the lexer, I want to come back because so I'm using this HSL trimap, which is a great structure. It's fine, but the API on it is as it behaves like a map, which is fine. That's what it was designed to do. What we really need though is more like we need a try, but we're using a try more as like a state machine structure. And so we're probably I'm going to make my own for this because then I can just expose the internal structure the way this thing needs to use it. And a lot of this loop should simplify significantly by doing that. But for now, this works. We'll come back, we'll refactor it out. So it should be faster and because we're doing multiple loops. Inside of loops, we've got lots of prediction misses here. We can tidy this up quite a bit, so it doesn't do that so much. Also, there's a special case here for keywords. If we land on a keyword, we have to treat that a little bit specially. We have to determine if it's truly a standalone keyword syntactically or if it's just part of a larger word. We don't want to break on those if they're all combined together. And I just realized this condition probably also should be checking underscore explicitly because I believe that is alpha does not see underscore as, yeah, it does not see underscore as yeah. And that was pretty much it. Okay, so I push those up, and I actually think I'm going to try to, probably off stream, I'm going to try to knock out some of these and clean this up. And then tomorrow, maybe I'll have it to a point where we can then build our own try that's a little bit more geared specifically for what we're trying to do here, and then finish that one final refactoring, and then I mean really I gotta do directive. Do I need to do these? Why did I want to do these? I mean, these essentially can just call identifier. Yeah, these can just call identifier. because that's what they are. So, actually, so what has to happen here is insert first character is skip, then call identifier. Then this is going to be the same for this, except the first character is an at. Okay. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I had a crash, OBS crash. Don't know what happened there. Just decided to die. But second time was a charm. And yeah. Anyway, thanks everybody for dropping by. Tomorrow we'll continue and try to get the lexer wrapped up here. And then it'll be on to parsing, and then probably again off stream I'm going to try to firm up some of my approach to the parsing, so hopefully we kind of have a starting point at least for it. And really the parser should go pretty quickly, I think. And then once we have, you know, the parser up and running, we get our AST entities. Boy, oh boy, it should be, we'll be off to the races. Then it'll be time to start building the translator, which again, we'll be using that mustache templating library. And I mean, there's a lot of analogs, you know, like Basecode can decompose, obviously, can decompose down to assembly, can decompose down to C. So, I mean, most of this stuff will translate very easily. And so, yeah, we'll make some really good progress, I think. Then I think where we're probably going to spend a fair amount of time, ironically, like the translator, I think will go pretty quickly. But then what we need to do is the whole plumbing part in between that, which I kind of had a very loose concept of in the old Bootstrap. I want that to be better defined in this version. So we're probably going to spend some time on like the job system and how all that stuff, all the plumbing, right, that handles doing all the work gets put together. So, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like within a couple weeks, we would have a version of the Bootstrap that will well surpass what I had in terms of actually compiling Basecode to not only native code on the back end, but also we'll have the meta stuff. Then it will be spending time getting we can actually spend time on the language itself and the interaction between Basecode and the compiler and all that good stuff. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff coming. All right, everybody. I will be back tomorrow. Hopefully, I won't have an OBS crash tomorrow. And yeah, anyway, thanks, everybody. Have a good one. I will get this over on YouTube within the next day or so. See y'all tomorrow. Bye.